If you roll your window down just a fraction, the first thing that hits you isn't the morning breeze. It's the smell. It is a sharp, acidic, eye-watering stench. The unmistakable ammonia spike of dozens of feral cats treating a single patch of earth as a collective, open-air territory. There is a "for sale" sign hammered crookedly into what used to be a manicured lawn. The listing price has been slashed 3 times in 6 months. No bank will mortgage it in this state. No family will tour it. The man who owns it is slowly being driven mad by an ecological nightmare he cannot contain. And his neighbors have already begun filing formal complaints with the city. I look at the decay of his pride and joy, and for a fleeting second, a shadow of guilt passes over me. But then, I look at the faded dent in the front door. I remember who lives there. And I remember exactly what he did to me. Psychologists often speak about projection, our natural tendency to assume other people possess the exact same moral compass we do. It's a beautiful, dangerous lie. I learned the hard way that some people don't want a partner. They want a possession. To understand how a few dollars worth of cheap seeds turned my abuser's pristine sanctuary into a neighborhood biohazard, we have to go back 8 years. 8 years ago, I believed in the myth of the safe harbor. He was older, established, and owned a gorgeous colonial style home on the quiet side of town, high wing. I was young, trusting, and eager to build a life. But domestic control is a slow, silent poison. It rarely starts with a raised hand. It starts with a suggestion, a passing comment about the dress I chose, a heavy, disappointed sigh when I wanted to see my friends, a slow, systematic erosion of my independence until my entire world had shrunk to the exact boundary lines of his property. To keep from suffocating, I turned to the dirt. I spent thousands of dollars of my own hard-earned savings and countless, grueling hours digging up the clay, heavy soil around the foundation of his house, E1. I built deep, custom timber garden beds all the way around the perimeter I1. I imported specialized soil, planting delicate hydrangeas, rare English roses, and expensive perennials. It was my silent, desperate protest. He owned the house, the mortgage, and my schedule, but he didn't own the soil. If I could make something beautiful grow in his shadow, I convinced myself I could survive the winter of our relationship. But survival has its limits. My boiling point arrived on a rainy Tuesday night. It wasn't just verbal cruelty anymore. When his fingers tightened around my wrist with enough force to leave dark bruises, and the back of my head met the living room drywall with a dull, sickening thud, the illusion shattered. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. In that quiet, terrifying moment of impact, my mind went entirely cold. I waited until his heavy, whiskey, laden breathing signaled he was asleep, packed a single suitcase, and made the phone call that would end my sentence. The next afternoon, I returned with a moving truck to reclaim my life. And I was going to take my garden with me. The air in the house was thick with the scent of his stale victory. He sat in his armchair, a half-empty glass of amber liquid in his hand, watching me like a hawk watching a trapped bird. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to vanish, but I had unfinished business. My garden, my sanctuary. I had told him the day before, through a voice still raw from the previous night's terror, that I would be taking my flowers. He'd simply shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips, believing he was granting me a meager mercy. Take your dirt, covered weeds. He'd scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. The house is mine anyway. His arrogance was a weapon, but sometimes even a weapon can be turned. My first stop was the garden center, a place that once brought me immense joy. Now it felt clinical, a necessary errand on my path to freedom. I needed large, sturdy pots to carefully transplant my hydrangeas and roses, the living extensions of my defiant spirit. As I navigated the aisles, a flash of bright green caught my eye on a clearance rack, dozens of small packets, each labeled catnip seeds. I paused. Catnip. I knew it attracted cats, and I'd heard vague whispers about it being tricky to grow. Curiosity, or perhaps a nascent, vengeful imp, urged me to pick up a packet. I found a young, cheerful nursery assistant and asked, almost idly, about the seeds. Oh, catnip, she chirped, her eyes bright. They're a bit finicky from seed, honestly. Most people buy starts. But if you get them to germinate, woo. They're like an invasive species once they take hold. Good luck getting rid of it then. Her words, delivered with a friendly warning, landed in my mind like a perfectly aimed dart. Invasive species. Good luck getting rid of it. A cold, calculating spark ignited in the quiet desolation of my heart. Not grand vengeance, not illegal destruction, but a minor, persistent, perfectly legal annoyance. Something that would gnaw at him, slowly, silently, for years to come. A tiny, organic Trojan horse. Looking back, that was my first mistake, or perhaps my most brilliant stroke. I bought every packet they had, dozens of them. The cheerful assistant, oblivious, just smiled and told me to sow them. With good intentions. Returning to the house was an exercise in pure, unadulterated performance. I moved slowly, methodically, under his intermittent, watchful gaze. Each hydrangea, each rose bush was carefully unearthed, its roots gently coaxed from the soil, wrapped in damp burlap, and placed into its new pot. He watched, occasionally shouting a sarcastic comment from the kitchen about how long I was taking, reveling in the illusion of his victory. He thought he was watching me, salvage a few pathetic plants. He had no idea I was meticulously preparing his downfall. As I emptied each garden bed, the soil beneath was revealed, perfectly tilled, rich with compost, aerated from months of careful cultivation. The ideal nursery for an invasive species. When he went inside for another drink, I worked quickly. With deft, practiced hands, I sprinkled handful after handful of the tiny catnip seeds into the freshly turned earth. I mixed them deep into the soil with a small trowel, ensuring they were thoroughly integrated, not merely scattered on the surface. Then I smoothed over the beds, leaving them looking neat, bare, and utterly unremarkable. When I finally drove away, the rear of the moving truck filled with my potted garden, and the trunk of my car, holding the last of my belongings, I didn't look back. I didn't scream or curse or shed another tear. I simply drove. I left him with his house, his liquor, and his smug satisfaction. And I left him with a living legacy buried deep beneath the soil, waiting for the perfect conditions to awaken. It was only meant to be a minor inconvenience, a fleeting, petty irritation. I had no idea it would fester, grow, and eventually consume him entirely. 8 years. It is remarkable how time behaves when you are no longer living in survival mode. When you stop waiting for the next blow to fall, your brain finally has the luxury to process, to heal, and to build. I rebuilt my life from the ground up, starting my own consulting firm and letting the memory of that suffocating colonial house fade into a distant, blurry background. I never once looked back. I never sought updates. As far as I was concerned, he and I existed in entirely different universes. Until yesterday, I had just signed a high-profile client whose estate was located in one of the most affluent, quiet pockets of my old town. Driving to our first face-to-face meeting, I realized with a sudden, tight jolt in my chest that his street was only 2 blocks away from my former prison. Curiosity is a strange, compulsive thing. Before I could talk myself out of it, I turned the wheel and took a detour down a road I swore I'd never travel again. What I expected to see was a neat, empty yard. Perhaps a new garden planted by a man who had long since forgotten my existence. What I actually saw was a green apocalypse. Most people do not understand the true nature of catnip. To the casual observer, it is just a harmless herb. But botanically, it is a member of the mint family, Lemiaceae. And mint does not negotiate. It spreads through an aggressive, subterranean network of runners called rhizomes. Because I had planted those seeds in meticulously aerated, nutrient-rich soil right before the autumn rains, I hadn't just scattered a few seeds. I had unknowingly built the ultimate incubation chamber. The garden beds I had built were completely gone, swallowed by a massive, waste, high forest of jagged green leaves. The plant had escaped its borders, choking out the grass, invading the crawl spaces, and erupting through the seams of the pavement. And the cats. There were easily 7 or 8 stray felines lounging on the porch, rolling in the dirt, and aggressively marking their territory. Later that afternoon, sitting in the pristine, sunlit office of my new client, I carefully steered the conversation toward the neighborhood. I casually asked about the unusual property 2 blocks over. Oh, that absolute disaster. My client sighed, shaking his head. That is the local tragedy. The owner has been trying to sell that place for over 2 years, but he's trapped. Apparently, about 8 years ago, some sort of highly aggressive weed took over his yard. He's tried everything to kill it. He went on to explain the futile, desperate measures my ex had taken. He had sprayed heavy-duty, toxic herbicides, but the chemicals only poisoned his own topsoil, leaving the deep, stubborn rhizomes completely unharmed too. He had hired contractors to pave over a portion of the yard, but the persistent stalks simply cracked right through the asphalt the following spring. He had even spent thousands on excavators to dig up the dirt. But if you leave even a single fraction of a catnip root in the earth, it returns twice as thick to Huang. But the worst part, my client whispered, leaning in, is the summer. When the sun bakes those weeds, the entire end of the block smells like a damp, neglected tiger cage. The HOA has fined him tens of thousands of dollars. His neighbors won't speak to him. He's a pariah living in a feline-infested ruin. I sat there, sipping my tea, nodding politely as my client spoke. My face was a mask of professional sympathy, but inside, a cold, quiet wave of realization washed over me. I had only wanted to cause a minor annoyance, a petty, fleeting irritation to match the petty, cruel man who had hurt me. I had no idea that nature would take my side so completely. I rolled the window back up, shutting out the smell of the yard, and with it, the final, lingering ghost of my past. As I drove away from that street, I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline. I didn't laugh. I just felt a deep, quiet stillness. There is a profound irony in how we define justice. We are taught by movies and books to look for dramatic confrontations, screaming matches, courtroom battles, or burning bridges. But the most devastating consequences are almost always the ones we cultivate ourselves. When I left him 8 years ago, he believed he had won. He kept the colonial house, the prime suburban real estate, and the empty, pristine garden beds. He thought he had stripped me of my only sanctuary and left me with nothing. He didn't realize that the soil he took so much pride in was the very thing that would harbor his undoing. I didn't break a single law. I didn't vandalize his home, ruin his credit, or spread rumors to destroy his social standing. I simply planted a seed, the rain, the earth, and his own stubborn refusal to understand. The things he claimed to own did the rest. Because he was a man obsessed with appearances, his punishment was beautifully, poetically symmetrical. The very ground he stood on became a public embarrassment, a howling, feline, infested testament to his inability to control his own domain. Looking back, I realized that people like him are always the architects of their own prisons. Their arrogance is a form of blindness. They go through life assuming that the quiet people they hurt will either scream, fade away, or strike back with predictable anger. They never expect the quiet ones to simply walk away, leaving a silent, ticking clock buried in the ground behind them. Sometimes, the best thing you can do with your anger is to plant it, walk away, and let nature do the weeding. But sometimes, you don't have to wait 8 long years for the seeds of arrogance to bloom. Sometimes, the scales of the universe are balanced in a single afternoon, in a damp basement halfway across the world. With nothing but a cheap blue ballpoint pen and a scrap of paper. If you want to see what happened when an insufferably rude French tourist cornered me in a freezing Helsinki tattoo parlor, demanding a deep warrior translation of love, only to walk out permanently branded on his shoulder with the most savage, vulgar, and embarrassing insult in the entire Mandarin language. Click on the video on your screen right now. I'll see you there.